you only have so much life energy to go around in this lifetime, right? So do you want to spend your limited amount of life energy in exchange for a currency, or do you want to spend your limited amount of life energy doing things like volunteer work or spending time with your family and friends? When you consider you're exchanging your life energy for a currency, the dollar or some other currency that's continuously losing its purchasing value. So your precious life energy can now be stored in something called Bitcoin that does hold your life energy over time because it's going up in correlation to the fiat it's being measured in is going down. So that's why Bitcoin is so precious and such an amazing invention, because it just benefits all of mankind in that way.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Tyler back to the podcast. Tyler has a background in IT, is a Bitcoin advocate and teacher, offering a 5-day simple course for beginners. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Tyler.
Thank you, Paula. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So, what's been happening in the last 6 months since we spoke?
Well, I continue to educate myself on Bitcoin, and I've been working a little bit in the IT field, trying to get certified in certain areas, and yeah, just continue the education process.
Yeah, we're always educating and moving forward. So I wanted to talk this time
It
about.
never ends with Bitcoin.
That's right. It's a never-ending rabbit hole. You lost $1 million by selling your Bitcoin. Tell us about that story.
Yes, I did. The funny thing is it's not really painful to say that anymore, like it used to be, because you can recover with Bitcoin. But yeah, I mentioned that story in my course and just when teaching people on the general basics of Bitcoin, just to show that if you're not careful and if you don't have patience, it can come back to bite you, right? What happened was it was back somewhat the early days of Bitcoin, back in I think 2010 or so. And a friend of mine had told me about Bitcoin, and I started reading the main couple of forums about Bitcoin. And like most people, I didn't really fully get it. And I thought it might just be a fringe thing that goes away. But something about it, especially as a technologist myself, something about it kept me coming back. And I really respected my friend, a mentor who mentioned Bitcoin to me. So I was reading about it on some forums. And at the time, I was in software development and I was kind of focused my efforts on that. But it was in the background, kind of percolating. And then I came back to it and I decided, maybe I should open a Coinbase account and get some. So I did that and I held it. I bought a small amount, what I thought was a small amount, and and I held it for a year or two. I think I was working downtown Boston at the time, and there was a magazine article in my office about Bitcoin. I saw like the headline or whatever, and I picked it up and I read it. And the article was about how the federal government was probably going to tax Bitcoin like real estate and handle it like real estate. And in my mind, the whole idea to buy Bitcoin was to kind of hedge myself against the system. And that's why, I was interested in Bitcoin, like this neutral, you know, decentralized form of money. That's what was attractive to me about it. And when I read that, I felt they're already getting their hands around Bitcoin and this is how they're going to control it. So I decided, they're going to shut this down or they're going to control it or tax it to death or something. They're not going to let it exist how it should exist. And I didn't have enough knowledge yet about the fundamentals of Bitcoin's engineering and how that's not possible in a lot of ways. So I thought about it for a few minutes and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to cash that out and put it into my Roth IRA because Bitcoin's never going to be allowed to exist in the way we want it to exist. So I cashed it out, put it in my Roth IRA, and a couple years later, I started reading more about Bitcoin again. and I decided to get back in. So I got back in Bitcoin, I bought some other cryptos, and I was getting excited about the whole crypto space. Coinbase has an attribute where you can look at your past purchases on any coin and it will tell you like the present day value. At least it used to. And so I logged into my account one day and I was like, you know what? I'm going to look at, I forgot when I bought it and stuff like that. And I looked back and I would have about $1 million at the time I looked at that in Bitcoin. And, of course I was kind of pissed off at the time, but by then I knew Bitcoin's growth trajectory and I knew I could recover, by consistently buying. So that's kind of what I've done. But it was a big, big, big lesson for me, that it's that old story of, they did a investigation at some of the major brokerage houses about who the best investors were. And often it was the people who lost their passwords and didn't log in for like decades. So the more you fool around with your investments sometimes and click the buy and sell buttons, you're usually just chopping yourself to pieces and harming your net worth. So
I saw Fidelity did a study, and the accounts that performed best were the people who had deceased.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
the one I'm talking about, I think.
Yeah. Or lost their passwords. You're right.
So I will not be selling my Bitcoin for a very long time.
So, would you say for newcomers, it's really important to understand Bitcoin?
It really is. What I would tell newcomers is I know Michael Saylor talks about this sometimes, or he really illustrated it in a great way. And I didn't know like how condensed the period is, but it's literally like a few days per year that Bitcoin makes like the vast majority of its gains on the chart. It's a really, really small period. So how could anyone time Bitcoin? How are you going to time it well? Now I did somewhat time this past cycle really well. I knew enough about the macro cycles to know when, the general time period I should mostly be buying. So I did get in, you know, a lot around that $20,000 to $21,000 range. I knew that was probably, near the bottom of the cycle, but I did it over an extended period, those buys. If you're lump summing or things like that, you really got to be patient and just DCA or something, because
Yeah.
any time it could just surprise you and go up quite a bit in the span of a week.
Yes. Yeah. Understanding the cycles, we know that there is a 4-year cycle and that it tends to go up for 3 years and have a correction. This might change in the future, but so far it's followed that cycle.
Yeah, exactly. With the ETFs, I think possibly cycle theory could be somewhat broken. We'll have to see. And plus, having events are having less effect because the numbers go down each halving. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out, because now you've got that constant buy pressure from ETFs and IRAs and wealth funds and things like that. Those kind of institutions will probably be DCA on a consistent basis. So it's going to be really exciting because there's only so much Bitcoin to go around. The more I think about it, when you have all this constant buy pressure on a consistent basis, I don't know, things could get really explosive.
Well, you mentioned patience, and Bitcoin has been in a range for a couple of months now. And many of us believe that there is still more upside in this cycle, even though we're trying on this channel not to focus too much on price. But when priced in US dollars, Bitcoin continues to go up. However, do you think that there is still more upside in the cycle?
I do. And also, you were saying Bitcoin against USD goes up. And what's amazing is how now the chart against altcoins is so consistently up. The ETH people and the altcoin crowd is just so frustrated by that. Bitcoin's dominance just continues to reign right now. I mean, I would think at some point this year that things might turn a little bit and altcoins might go up against Bitcoin. But again, it might be such a small period that altcoin investing might not be worth it for most people in the future when you can just stack a Bitcoin. But yes, I do think this year we do have more upside, only because when you study the macro environment a little bit, liquidity is just kind of entering the world market in a lot of ways. And I think that's a main driver for Bitcoin's price and other asset prices, of course. So I think the stock market has room to grow this year before a major correction, which probably means Bitcoin does too. And also, I think President Trump will do anything possible, to pump the markets for sure.
Yeah, he does like the markets to be going up. It's good for business.
Very much.
Just my thoughts on it. I do think there'll still be a bit of an altcoin cycle. Might not be the ones we think, and like you mentioned, it might not be too long. And who knows what's going to happen with meme coins. But the reason why I say that is because when new people come in, they tend to go to the less expensive coins because they don't understand Bitcoin. So we might have that. And then I also think there will be a correction, but maybe not as big as before. Just still pretty shell shocked from the last one. And yeah, so I think there could be, but nobody knows for sure. And that's why there's no investment advice. It's DCA and DCA on dips if you can, and learn about Bitcoin.
Exactly. It's really funny you say that. I kind of forgot about that dynamic that still plays out about the average newcomer saying, "There's no way I can afford $97,000 per Bitcoin." And yeah, just that psychological barrier is real. Because I've had to explain that to so many people. You can buy $5 a Bitcoin if you want, but still, it's just not as attractive to them if you can't get a whole Bitcoin.
Yep.
So I think a lot of it is because our language around Bitcoin, we don't talk about Bitcoin in terms of sats very much. We talk about it in terms of whole Bitcoin. But in the future, I think the word sats is going to be mentioned a lot more, of course, divisions of Bitcoin or fragments of Bitcoin. That's going to be discussed a lot more as purchases and things like that are made with Bitcoin, and it becomes more of a currency than it is now, I guess, even though I think it'll always be primarily a store of value. And I think that's perfectly okay. I'm one of the people that I don't really think Bitcoin has to become like a ubiquitous currency used for everything. I don't think that's quite necessary.
Yeah, that will be interesting because, Jeff Booth says that Bitcoin will fail as a store of value if it doesn't become a medium of exchange.
That's
So,
interesting.
yeah, I study Jeff Booth every week and going to be talking to him again. So I have to study him to keep up with him.
I really like Jeff Booth's
Yeah.
angles on things. I don't know if I quite agree on that point, only because I think the dollar can be used for a very long time as a medium of exchange, and you can always just convert your BTC into dollars. And I don't know, there's some other things about Bitcoin and Lightning that might prevent it from being the only currency around.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the great thing. That's why we have these discussions because nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. But I do think technology will improve and it will make it easier for everybody to use. It might just convert Bitcoin into US dollars like it already is in some countries. It converts Bitcoin to the currency.
Exactly. And when you think about the expansion and the interplay of stable coins and Bitcoin, right? Stablecoin usage keeps it growing, and that could last a very long time, because stablecoins are basically the US dollar. They're just more convenient, they're faster, less fees involved to transfer the dollar around the world, right? So, like you said, if you can quickly convert Bitcoin on the fly into stable coins. The US government will probably very much like to keep expanding stable coins and their usage.
Yeah. And, I really like your course. It's a simple 5-day course that gets somebody started on their Bitcoin journey. And you start with that governments are printing money. So tell us a little bit about that and how you think that's playing out still today.
Thank you, Paula. I'm glad you liked it. And what was the question about the course?
So, because your day one, you start out telling people about how governments print money.
Right. Yes,
And is that still playing out today?
absolutely. Because if you study, the basic history of money and by reading books like the Bitcoin Standard and things like that, you will discover, that all fiat currencies have expanded over time and they kind of become less and less valuable over time per unit. So that's basically the printing of money. And it's more about psychology. I think it's just governments can't help themselves over time from creating money to pay for their projects, whether it be wars or social programs or whatever. When you can just print more of your fiat currency to fund those, that's what they end up doing. And in the end, it ends up hurting the purchasing power of the populace. But they can kind of get away with that because a lot of times the rate of printing money as it's a rate of increase that doesn't shock the system very quickly in the population, so you don't end up with revolutions or protests because it kind of happens over time. But of course, there are other cases where inflation happens too fast and then people revolt, right? But in places like the United States, it's happened at a slow enough rate where you don't have people picketing in the streets. That's what I always argue. That's what's amazing to me. The whole psychological aspect of money and Bitcoin fascinates me because I would argue that if the average American knew what inflation really is and what's really going on, how their purchasing power keeps going down and why it's going down, I think people would revolt and they wouldn't stand for it. It's pretty sad, but most of the population just says that's the way it is. And I don't really know why. I just know that my eggs keep costing more and more every time I go to the grocery store. And there's nothing I can do about it, right?
And we tend to be short term thinkers where, yes, yeah, my eggs are going up today. But if you go into the 10-year time frame, if you're saving $100,000, you're only going to have about 60,000, right, in 10 years worth of purchasing power. And people just tend not to look ahead, or like you said, the small amount of inflation, even though they say it's 3 or 2%, it really is closer to 10 or 14%.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, government's giving us these fallacious numbers that that don't
Yeah.
add up at all. They're saying things like inflation's only 3% and or 2% or whatever, and it's just not matching up to our reality when we're going into stores and things like that. Yeah, people live in a small box time frame. They don't think long term, which is an amazing effect of becoming integrated with Bitcoin, as you do become more of a long term thinker and hopefully less stressed.
Very true. Tend to get low time preference and think about what I'm spending my money on since I found Bitcoin.
Right. Could I get a few more sats?
Or should I buy that new purse?
That's right.
So, day two of your course, you mentioned that Bitcoin preserves your life energy, which is the solution to what we've just talked about, printing money and inflation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that goes back to a book that I read many years ago. I think it's called Your Money or Your Life, and It's a great book. I don't know if you've read it, but it's just a book about living a simple life and really understanding money at its fundamental level. That I had never heard anybody else define it like those two authors did. I think it was Vicky Robin and Joe Dominguez, I think were the authors. But the way they explain it was, when you work at a job, you're spending your life energy at that job. In exchange for that, you get money. So you only have so much life energy to go around in this lifetime, right? So do you want to spend your limited amount of life energy in exchange for a currency, or do you want to spend your limited amount of life energy doing things like volunteer work or spending time with your family and friends? When you consider you're exchanging your life energy for a currency, the dollar or some other currency that's continuously losing its purchasing value. So that makes the situation a lot more scary when you think about that. So there's this constant drainage on your energy because what you're exchanging it for is losing its storage value, right? So your precious life energy can now be stored in something called Bitcoin that does hold your life energy over time because it's going up in correlation to the fiat it's being measured in is going down. So that's why Bitcoin is so precious, and such an amazing invention because it just benefits all of mankind in that way. We only have so much of our energy and our efforts to go around. And it's amazing now that we have this vehicle that you can preserve it in, which frees up our resources to do maybe some things we really dream of doing.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that book because a lot of people mention that about storing our life energy, but I didn't know where it came from or I haven't seen it in a book. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's a great old classic book about becoming kind of extremely minimalist and really prioritizing your values and what you want to spend your time on.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely in that phase.
Yeah. The funny thing is when they wrote that book back then, they were advocating for very conservative investments to achieve freedom, like US bonds. So they've done like a revised version since then, because they realized that bonds and some of these other very conservative instruments, they have no chance against our rate of inflation now.
Well, they would probably recommend gold, and we know that Bitcoin is better than gold for many reasons. And you point that out in the book. For one, it's much more portable. That's like the analog system versus the digital system, right?
Yes. Yeah. Gold, I used to be very interested in. I mean, I've always been investing in stocks and equities and a little bit of bonds in the past and a little bit of gold. I was very interested in like the gold mining sector because the stocks were very volatile, which I liked. But yeah, gold itself, if you think about it, it has some industrial use, but there's not a lot of, this phrase intrinsic value that people throw around. Again, it's really about just a mass acceptance of something and using it to hold value, right? Because there's not a lot of intrinsic quality to gold. It's a rock that we have decided as society is valuable, even though the industrial use really isn't that great in comparison to a lot of other materials. So, in that sense, Bitcoin is similar because increasingly, just a lot of the world is deciding, you know what? We think Bitcoin is valuable. And that's good enough. It turns out that is good enough, right? Because gold has been accepted as something valuable for centuries. And now people at mass are deciding that Bitcoin has enough characteristics that we deem it valuable. Because you hear, the arguments against Bitcoin, it has no intrinsic value. It's just digits on a ledger or whatever. That doesn't really matter. If enough people decide it has value, it's going to have value.
Very true. And that's the Lindy effect, right?
Yes, exactly. Mass adoption hits that growth curve and continues at an accelerated rate for a while. And I think we're kind of just hitting that up part of the S curve. So I think the next 10 years are going to be amazing for the valuation of Bitcoin, and probably, a lot more advancement on the rails built on Bitcoin. I'm kind of excited about that, just storing a lot of valuable information on the Bitcoin chain itself by using things like just other layers built on top.
Yeah, that's the advancement of technology. I just want to go back because I always want to say this on the podcast when people say our time is limited. Because I follow this guy, Brian Johnson, on X, and his tagline is "Don't die," because he believes we will be able to live forever. And he's
Right.
like super young looking, and he's a billionaire, and he monitors his whole body every single day. And
I've seen them.
yeah.
Please remind me to not die, by the way, in the future.
So the only reason I bring that up is because while some people might be lucky enough to not die, it's really a far off thought and maybe possible in the future. I don't know. But in the meantime, we'll continue to stack sats and, you know, treat our time as it is important and special because it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, just it's amazing how when you can zoom out and see the growth trajectory and rapid adoption of Bitcoin across the world in comparison to other technologies. It's almost faster than anything we've seen, including the growth of the internet and the growth of television and things like that. It's just amazing that we have this opportunity now to store a life energy like that, and we could be entering a whole new age of having, freedom to pursue passions and things like that we never even dreamed of, because we have this precious asset that's storing our life energy like that and allowing us to do what we were really born to do in a lot of cases, I think.
Yeah. And on your website, you have an article about Bitcoin being a spiritual force. I love that. Tell us a little bit about how Bitcoin is spiritual to you.
Well, I think just in that sense that, no matter what background you're coming from, I'd really get into kind of the social justice side of Bitcoin. You think about people in a lot of these so-called third world countries that don't have the opportunities we do here in a lot of the West. And if they can just find some kind of device like a cell phone, they can start converting some of their currency into Bitcoin somehow and storing their work energy. They never had that opportunity before. And it's no wonder that in the beginning, especially, a lot of governments were very anti-Bitcoin, which just, I don't know, it's almost like diabolical, the way a lot of governments behave, and the way they forge their power and keep their power, by keeping people somewhat enslaved. And yeah, so in that sense, it is a spiritual force that, is causing a liberation across the world. Again, it takes a long time though for people to get out of their present mindset and realize that it's even a possibility for a better world. It might seem too good to be true to a lot of people when they hear about something like Bitcoin, because they've been entrenched in their system for so long. I think Jeff Booth talks about that a lot. It's really this mental barrier. It's like, here you are, here's freedom, step forward, please, and participate. But a lot of people are choosing, no, I'm much more comfortable in my fiat system right now, and I'm going to stay here. I'm fine. So it's just interesting how the mindset change takes a long time. But in that sense, I do think it is spiritual, right? Because it provides an opportunity for freedom, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, in a way that other movements haven't.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You mentioned the freedom. Do you think that the self sovereignty, having Bitcoin in cold storage versus an ETF, is that important? Or do you think,
That's a really interesting subject that I've evolved a little bit on. Of course, I'm a Bitcoiner, and I do advocate for self storage and that's what I do. And I love multi-sig solutions and things like that. But honestly, the more and more I look at it, I think it's almost unstoppable as far as institutions, more and more institutions storing people's Bitcoin, because it's just the practicality of it is so obvious. The older generation, especially, which has a lot of the wealth, they are not going to deal with hardware wallets and passwords and things like that. I was just talking to a woman in her 60s the other day about that. It gets her like a little irritated and angry when I talk to her about self-storage with Bitcoin. It just doesn't click at all. And she's like, "Well, what if you lose that? Isn't it that's just wrong. If you lose it, you mean it's gone forever?" I said, "Yes, it is." And she doesn't like that aspect. And a lot of other people don't either. And honestly, I don't know if you saw recently, did you see Plan B
Yeah.
announcement?
Yeah. I made a comment on that because I was quite
Yeah,
surprised by that. I thought maybe it's a result of security issues that he doesn't, even though he is under a pseudonym, he doesn't want people to think they can come and get his Bitcoin. Or
right, right.
or he really is in the ETFs.
Yeah, I know. And just so the viewers know, Plan B is a big worldwide known Bitcoin analyst. And he recently announced that he converted his Bitcoin into the Bitcoin ETFs. And I thought that's a big, big story because I honestly think a lot of people might be doing that behind the scenes. The other thing to realize is like ETFs now, they provide a convenience that spot pure Bitcoin does not, in that you can borrow against ETFs a lot easier right now. And you have the satisfaction of knowing your Bitcoin is being held in a major institution with like FDIC protection and at certain levels and things like that. So yeah, my thinking on that has evolved a little bit. At this point, I wouldn't put it past myself to store some of my Bitcoin in ETFs. It's hard to say though, because I think as time goes by, you're going to be able to put your Bitcoin in banks and institutions like Fidelity or Vanguard and things like that. I think that's going to keep happening more and more. So, if you're protected with certain levels of insurance, why wouldn't a lot of people store their Bitcoin with institutions? Instead of trusting yourself, writing down your password. So I need to learn more, and I'm open. I'm definitely open to it. I know Jeff Booth is like his stomach is turning right now listening to us.
Well, the good thing about Jeff is he doesn't get upset by how anybody wants to do it. But I think ultimately his belief is there are two separate protocols, the fiat system and the Bitcoin protocol. And in the long, long run, we will move to the Bitcoin. And that if you buy an ETF, you are really on the fiat rails, plus not your keys, not your coins. So you have to be sure that your government is not going to one day say, okay, well, no more Bitcoin. We're selling the Bitcoin. We'll give you the money for it, because you don't actually have access to the Bitcoin, even though some ETFs are promising to do that. But the whole point is to have, I would say, have some in self sovereignty, and depends where you are in the world, right? If you don't trust your government, then you got to learn to hold your coins. But I definitely agree with what you said about older people, and many people are preferring the ETFs because they feel that they are safe, insured, and their governments are safe.
Right, exactly. So it all kind of comes back to, how much you trust your government, like you said, and government stability and things like that. I mean, I'll always have some Bitcoin held by me, for sure, but I probably at this point wouldn't mind storing some of my Bitcoin in ETFs as long as I'm confident, that the government isn't going to crumble any day. So of course that can change over time. So we'll just monitor and see how that all plays out. But there's always going to be enough Bitcoin purists to keep the network viable and protected by running nodes and holding, Bitcoin. And remember, like, wallets and things like that are also going to evolve. So self-storage will probably become more and more secure and more easier to handle.
Yeah, those are good points. Are you concerned with security?
My personal security, or
Yeah, just with the security of holding Bitcoin. I mean, yes, we can have it in multi-sig so that we're protected, but with the threat of people trying to steal your Bitcoin or get it
right.
from you.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, there have been stories across the world of people being kidnapped and things like that. So that's another reason people probably are attracted to ETFs.
Yeah.
But more and more, I think as time goes by, a lot of criminals and things like that, they're gonna realize that most people have their Bitcoin in multi-sig solutions, or solutions that are not like in their house or on them in their brain, or there's ways to kind of diffuse that risk. I don't think it will be a much of a problem
No, and I
overall.
keep going back to I want to live in the world I'd like to see, and I continue to have good energy around, see good things happening. However, also be safe about it. It doesn't mean you're not safe, because I think, there's I live in Miami. There's lots of people with huge houses with lots of wealth. They're at risk too, for
Right.
everybody could be. But I think as long as we continue to be safe and get good solutions for storage, that's the best we can do. And
I
not
agree.
good energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. In order to attract wealth and to get to Bitcoin, I had to have a strong mindset. And having a good mindset is also, I believe, our thoughts create our reality. So that's why I bring that up.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you there. I've been doing a lot of reading in that area recently with some of the old classics and positive thought vibration. And I think Bitcoin is definitely related to a lot of that, in that there's such a positive mindset with so many Bitcoiners that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that we're creating our own positive reality a lot on the network.
I really like that. So, do you think the current administration potentially having a Bitcoin strategic reserve and nation states following is going to change things for Bitcoin?
I do. I think it's inevitable because people are realizing over time again that, again, it's just amazing to watch it from a distance, and seeing this mind change across the planet in regards to this new asset, Bitcoin. And that's slowly, infiltrating governments too. So I don't know how governments could keep from accumulating Bitcoin. Why wouldn't they? It's proving to be the most valuable asset over time, and they can see its rate of growth. They see the adoption is rapid, so they'd be shooting themselves in the foot to not accumulate Bitcoin. At this point, it's almost stupid. If you're a government, why wouldn't you create some kind of reserve of Bitcoin? In fact, I wouldn't doubt at all if there's some kind of behind the scenes conspiracy to keep it quiet, that a lot of them are accumulating Bitcoin. But that can only last for so long, too, before the word gets out. Yeah. And when you consider, again, this simple truth in regards to Bitcoin, the supply cannot expand. That's never happened with a major asset before. And the repercussions could be something that we can't even imagine. I'm not a mathematician, but I'm smart enough to know when you have this much demand and growing demand on an asset that's hard capped, something explosive is going to happen. And again, it's like Satoshi planned for that, right? Because Bitcoin is divisible into such small fragments that it's okay if there's that much demand. We've kind of planned for that. So it's just amazing. And so, of course, the USD value of Bitcoin is going to skyrocket, continue to go up, because larger and larger players, larger and larger pools of money are going to convert into Bitcoin. Even if they're skeptical of Bitcoin, why wouldn't you get some of it just in case you're wrong, right? And just those numbers alone of skeptical players putting a portion of their wealth into Bitcoin could make the value of Bitcoin skyrocket. It's like you don't even have to be a full believer. to have a huge effect on Bitcoin's adoption.
Yeah, it might be good just to get some, as Michael Saylor says. But as you know, people do take profits to either buy a house, lifestyle chips. Where do you think it goes this cycle? Even if, just for fun.
Yeah, this cycle, I wouldn't doubt if it hits, I don't know, 200. I'm staying conservative. I could see 200 this cycle, and then maybe the next cycle, 2028 or 29, whatever it is, it could hit, 500 maybe, 5 to 700. I wouldn't doubt if something like that happened. I still think the price is being somewhat suppressed so that certain players can accumulate. But
Yeah,
I don't know. What do you think?
it's amazing how they do that. I'm even more conservative. I think 150,
Okay. Yeah.
but I think anything's possible. Could go much higher. It all comes down to how much we end up printing and M2 supply, I believe. And the thing is, according to Larry Lepard, we are going to have to print a lot of money to pay the debt
Yeah.
that continues to increase. And it's just a matter of how long they can hold that off.
Right. So it's like a win-win if you're in Bitcoin, right? You know it's inevitably coming.
But we have to be patient. So we talked about patience. How do you stay patient?
Yeah, well, I learned my lesson, my $1 million lesson. I do not sell Bitcoin anymore, period. It doesn't matter what the price is doing or how low it goes in a bear market or whatever, because I know what's inevitable for its adoption. And that's comforting, you know? I don't know, maybe the older I get to, the more patient I get. And to realize I've got such a precious asset like that just gives me a lot of comfort. And I'm willing to wait even past my lifetime if I need to. I'm not selling my Bitcoin. It'll stay within my family. And the other thing about what you were saying is there's going to be increasing, ways to borrow against your Bitcoin probably, as long as we're also in a fiat system. So that's less and less incentive for people to sell, right? Why would you sell when you can borrow against your appreciating asset? So that's even more upward pressure on the price and value of Bitcoin.
In order to not sell and to borrow would mean you either have to have enough money coming in so that you can cover your expenses or have a good reason, like you said. But you need to have the cash flow. Some people might need to sell because they don't have the cash flow.
Yeah. Or they could borrow against it in the future, which I think more and more people will do as it becomes more and more convenient with banks. I mean, I think this year, even, I wouldn't be surprised if major banks allow you to borrow against your Bitcoin that they will hold for you as collateral. I think that will become very common very, very soon.
There's that option. So that's wonderful. So, Tyler, in the last year, how has Bitcoin changed you or what have you learned?
I think, I like you brought up patience before. I think I'm just becoming a more patient person and more less worried about my financial future and family obligations and things like that because I do have a chunk of Bitcoin that I know is going to outpace the rate of inflation. It's very comforting. Sometimes my perspective will change on that, driving around or whatever. I'll be thinking, like, wait a second, why am I worried about finances? I have some Bitcoin. Like I'm pretty much set according to how a lot of people would view the future of Bitcoin, right? But I think I've just been so programmed, like so many other people, to go out there and join the rat race and accumulate more if I can. Um, but it's just I think I've found a lot more comfort in the last year, a lot more peace around finances and hope for the world. Bitcoin just gives me so much societal hope. I think there will be like a lot of medical advancements and things like that because of Bitcoin. I think there's going to be less conflict around the world, absolutely, because of Bitcoin. There will be less to fight over. We won't have to go to war over resources and things like that as much in the future. So I think there's just going to be a lot less strife. I know it seems chaotic and very depressing in a lot of ways, when you read um, a lot of the dishonest news media and things like that, they intentionally inflame us in a lot of ways. But when you step back and you look at the broader picture, I think a better world is appearing because of Bitcoin and other technological advancements in medicine and energy storage and production. I think those things are converging, now in a way that's going to be really miraculous for a lot of the planet. Definitely.
Well, that's a beautiful thing and a great place to end.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tyler. Tell us where people can find you.
If you want, you can find me on X. It's Tyler Div, DIV, and the actual address is Tyler DIVV. And I think that's good for now.
Great. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Great chatting with you, Paula.